Having completed the heel flap on both socks here, so we've done our cuff, knitted the leg and knitted the heel flap on both socks at the same time. I'm now going to be moving on to knitting the heel turn and picking up stitches for the gusset. And this is where things change slightly, because you have to now work on one at a time. You do part of the process on one, then you can move and do part of the process on the second one, and then we work back round again. So I'm going to start by working the heel turn on sock 1, which is the orange sock. So to start with the heel turn, I've just got to, obviously at the end of the last stitch I forgot I needed to actually work that last stitch. So the first row of the heel turn, so I'm going to slip one and then I'm going to knit a number of stitches to take me part way across the row, and your pattern will tell you how many stitches you will be knitting. So in my case it's 8 stitches. So that's slip 1, then 2, 4, 6, 8. So I'm now going to do an SSK decrease. So slip, slip, put the needle back through, knit the 2 together and knit 1. And then that leaves 4 stitches on my left hand needle. I'm going to turn. And I have to complete all of this on the one sock before I can carry on and do the same thing on the second sock. So I've now turned. I'm going to now knit across to start the shaping on the other side. So slip the first stitch, and then in this case I'm going to purl 3 stitches, purl 2 together, purl 1, and I have 4 stitches left on this side. Turn, slip the first stitch, knit to 1 stitch before the gap. We've got a gap here, which is where we turned before, so we're going to knit up to 1 stitch before the gap, work an SSK decrease, that's slip, slip, knit 2 together, knit 1, turn. I'm going to slip the first stitch, and again I'm going to purl across to 1 stitch before the gap, so that's 1 stitch before my gap. So we're going to purl the 2 together, so that closes up the gap. Purl 1, turn, slip 1, knit across to 1 stitch before the gap, slip, slip, knit the 2 together, knit 1, turn. So we've nearly finished the heel turn. Slip that stitch, purl across to 1 stitch before the gap, purl 2 together, purl 1. So that completes the little heel turn on the first sock. But we haven't quite finished with this first sock now, because we have to knit across these stitches and then pick up stitches to the gusset from this one side of sock 1. So I'm now going to work across, so I'm still slipping the first stitch, knit across, and now we want to pick up our gusset stitches. So while we were knitting the heel flap, we were slipping the edge stitch so that we've got these chains down the edge, and we're going to pick up one stitch for each chain as we go down. So I'm going to go under that very first, that top chain, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've picked up 7 stitches, but I've not quite finished yet, because we want to avoid, one of the problems is getting a hole between these picked up stitches and when you start going back into the round. So to try and avoid that happening, it can be helpful to pick up 1 or 2 extra stitches, and it's important to keep it in the same line or column as we've been picking up all the way down the gusset. So to pick up the next stitch, I would go into this space here, which is in the same line, and I might do one more again in the row below. So I picked up 7 stitches from the gussets, from the slip stitch selvage, and then I've picked up another 2. That then takes these stitches slightly beyond the level of the stitches when we get back into knitting in the round, and that will hopefully avoid any problems of getting holes. So having picked up the stitches from that side, I've now completed the heel turn and half of the gusset stitches on sock 1. I can now move over to sock 2, and I need to complete the same process now on sock 2. So I'm going to push my sock 1 stitches onto the cord and bring up sock 2. Just bring my yarn across, and I'm now going to do exactly the same thing on sock 2. So we've got to do the heel turn first, so we start with our slip 1 and knit 8 for my pattern. Then I do the SSK decrease and knit 1, and I have 4 stitches left on my left needle. So I'm going to turn, slip 1, purl 3, purl 2 together, purl 1, and that leaves 4 on this side. So I turn, and now I continue. So from now on I work to 1 stitch before the gap, so slip the first stitch, knit across to 1 stitch before the gap, which is here. So I'm going to slip that stitch, slip the next stitch, and work the two together as an SSK, knit one, turn, just pull some more yarn over, slip the first stitch, purl to one stitch before the gap, purl two together, when you're doing this on your sock pattern you will use the stitch numbers that are provided in the pattern, but the principle is the same. Sorry, I've split the yarn here. I just want to try and get a cleaner stitch. The principle is the same. Whatever the numbers are with you when you start, is you're working across to one stitch before the gap, and on knit rows you're doing an SSK followed by knit one, and on the purl rows we're doing purl two together to close the gap and finishing with the purl one, two together, purl one. So again, that's the completion of the heel turn on sock 2. So now I need to work across so I can pick up my gusset stitches on sock 2. So work that stitch, and now with the point of the right needle I'm going to go down picking up my stitches. So under each chain, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So picking up the stitches under the chains should be the same as for the first sock, and then again we want to do our 2 extra stitches, making sure we keep in line in the same column as we were coming down the edge of the heel flap. So that's 1 and then 1 more. 2. So I've now completed the heel flap. We've completed the heel flap, we've done the heel turn, and we've picked up stitches down one side of the heel flap on each sock. I'm now going to rotate the stitches or the needles so that I can now work across the other half of the sock. So having turned the needles around, I can now shift everything around a bit. So I've got to pull the back needle out and push the front needle into the stitches so that I can now continue around the sock and start working in the round again. So I'm now going to just be knitting across the stitches which form the top of the foot. So we come across, and now instead of continuing on up to pick up the gusset stitches, we have to stop at that point on this sock, on sock number 2, and continue back over to sock number 1. This is where it changes a lot significantly from when you would normally do a sock, because you'd normally have done that, pick up one side across the foot, and then you'd pick up the other side of the heel flap. But when you're working 2 at a time, we can't do that because the yarn would be in the wrong place then. So we're going to now just carry on across the foot side of sock 1. Again, just making sure that you kind of keep your cable close to your stitches when you start working again so that you don't get a big loop. So we're now at the same point on sock 1 as we were. So sock 1 and sock 2, we've done exactly the same thing so far. We've knitted, made the heel turn, picked up stitches down one half of the heel flap on both, then we've knitted across the top of the foot on both. So now I need to set this up to start again. So we're going to rearrange the stitches so that we're now, just move that yarn out, ball of yarn out of the way. Right. So having now turned everything around, I can now pick up the stitches up this side of the heel flap, knit across the heel and back down to the other side of the heel flap. So we have to do that by changing the needles around. If I'd done it here, we'd have things in the wrong place. So we have to, again, as I say, move things around. So I'm now about to start picking up the gusset stitches on sock 1. And we want the same number of stitches as we had the other side. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but we actually want to go back down another 2, so keeping in line, so that's 8, 9. So I'm going to put my needle into that point there. I don't want to catch that loop, just put it in under there and bring a new stitch through, and then I've got to go up to the next row and go in one and bring a loop through, and then I can pick up under each chain as we go up the side. So I've now got the 2 extra stitches at the bottom to make sure that we don't get a hole, and then the 7 stitches up the side of the heel flap. Now I'm going to carry on and knit across the heel, and this is also where things change slightly. If you were working with a single sock, you would normally move your beginning and the end of round to the middle of the heel, but that doesn't really work when you're working with 2 at a time. You have to have the gusset stitches and heel stitches all on one needle, and we move it down so I've knitted all the way down to the end of the stitches that were picked up before. It looks a little bit odd at the moment, but what will happen now is that this will now become the new beginning and end of round. So I've now picked up all the stitches from for the gusset on sock 1, so I can push that down out of the way, and we now have to complete the same manoeuvre on sock 2. So again, we can go back and we can count our chains from here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I need to go down 2 more rows, so that's 1, 2. So I'm going to pick up my first stitch by pushing my needle into that point there. So that is, just get hold of my stitches, sorry. These things do get to be a bit fiddly, but once you've got past these situations, we're fine. So that's one stitch, and then I need to pick up one in the row above, which is my second stitch, and now I can pick up one stitch for each chain going back down the heel flap. Right, so that's all those stitches, heel flap stitches picked up. Knit across these heel stitches, and back down the gusset stitches on the other side of the heel. So we just get back down here. Till we get to the bottom. Right, there we are. So we now have both socks to the same position. We've done our heel flaps, heel turn, and we've got picked up gusset stitches from both sides of the heel flap. So from now on, until we finish the foot, this becomes, or the pink sock becomes sock 1, the orange sock becomes sock 2, and this is the beginning of the round. So you need to move your beginning end of round stitch marker or thread marker to this side, and you can now start working the foot of the sock. So you'd knit across the top of the foot on both, and then you do your first decreases. So this time when we decrease, you're going to do knit 1, and you'll do your SSK decrease, knit to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1, and again on this one you do knit 1, SSK, knit across to the other side, knit 2 together, knit 1. And then you do a round without any decreases. So you'd make the foot decreases in exactly the same way as you would do with a normal sock, but we've just moved the beginning and end of round to the other side, and it makes what was the second sock now the first sock. Once you've completed the decreases, you just knit the foot as normal till you get to the toe, and then you will do your toe decreases at either end of both needles, the same as you would if you were knitting a single sock. So that's the heel turn and gusset stitches picked up for socks 2 at a time.